The freaking 70s, man. 70s. Or maybe I should say the groovy 70s, man. The groovy 70s. This is a new, I guess, three-part series where I look at a decade. This week we're going to talk about the 70s, and then maybe next week the 80s, and I think I'll stop around the 90s. That's about time life stopped, right? Or at least stop being fun. But I figured I'd start with the 70s, because I could talk hours and hours about the 80s and probably a few hours about the 90s. But let's start with the 70s, because it was a cool decade. Now, I'm not going to mention any movies. That's because by the time I was into movies, the 70s movies that I like, except for Star Wars, I was kind of not seeing them in the 80s, in the 70s, you know what I mean? I was older, 80s, 90s, in my 20s and 30s, going back watching some of these 70s movies that I fell in love with. So I'm not going to really look at those. Well, we are going to kind of talk movies, but not really good movies. And there were some kid movies, mostly Disney movies that were horrible. Something like Cats from Space, or I think there were some Tim Conway movies where he teamed up with Don Knotts, maybe the Apple Dumpling Gang, is that the 70s? Freaky Friday with Jodie Foster and some others. It was just really bad time for kid movies. So I wasn't into kid movies in the 70s. So I'm not going to really focus on that. The one movie line I will talk about, I'll go ahead and talk about now. And that was badass car movies. Do you remember the badass car movie of the 70s? And the reason I mentioned this and not the other movies is because I like watching the cars. Now, I was born in 72, so I don't have a lot of memory of the 70s, although I do have some of my earliest memories of the 70s. So I can remember the car movies. They would come on like, remember when you only had like 3 channels and it would be like, this Sunday, 2 o'clock. Maybe a local, it wouldn't be nationwide, it'd be local. This Sunday, 2 o'clock, WKRS. Some local station like that, and they would be showing, what was it, Dirty Larry, Crazy Mary? Was that the name of it? Just some old crazy car movies. What was it, Death Race 2000? Now, of course, you got Smokey and the Bandit. Great 70s movie right there. Amazing. And you would always have these cars crashing into each other, jumping and stuff. So I really liked that as a kid, watching these things fly around and wreck and speed around. So that's about the only 70s movies we're going to talk about. There, we talked about those. So what else? Let me cheat and look. Let's get this one out of the way. Star Wars, duh. You can't talk 70s without talking Star Wars. It's the birth of pop culture. I know you're going to tell me Jaws was the first summer blockbuster. That should be when pop culture starts. No, it's Star Wars. Star Wars started the pop culture that we all love today. Although the 80s really formed the pop culture almost everything today where people reflect on pop culture mostly goes back to the 80s. So we're going to get that out of the way. Star Wars, of course, you can't talk 70s without talking Star Wars. So let's talk about something that was fun in school. This was pretty cool in school. Do you remember this? Yeah, if you grew up in the 70s, you probably remember this. If you grew up in the 80s, although I'm more of an 80s kid, there's 2 different versions of this, but we're going to talk about the 70s one here. You remember sitting in class. You're bored, right? Your teacher wants to teach you about the alphabet or tell you about pronouns or whatever. And you're sitting there like this, just thinking about the latest Schoolhouse Rock episode in your head. And she's going on about adjectives and everything. And then she rolls in this big metal, maybe it was huge. It was always huge. Or it was huge to us when we were little. This metal rack. Now, sitting on top of that metal rack was a film projector. And you knew this was going to be a kind of good day because you got a film projector. I can still hear that film projector now. Listen. Just hearing that sound, I can connect that smell, that hot bulb film smell. Now, of course, in the 80s, everybody watched it on VHS. But man, something about that, just in that room, they cut off the lights, the flickering of that bulb and the film. It was never good movies, at least in the 80s, they had VHS tapes, so we got to watch some real movies. These were always, some kind of safety video or don't get STD video or something like that. But still, you knew when they rolled that thing in, it was going to be fun. For one, not only did you get out of doing any work by watching a film, you could lay your head down and take a nap and nobody would probably notice. So that's something cool I really loved in the 70s. Films. Film day at school. And I remember the older kids, like the high school kids or middle school kids, they were the ones that came into the class, they're part of the AV club, I guess, and got to put the film in the reel and sit there and watch the movie. They probably got tired of watching the same thing every day. You know, had to sit in the classroom with us kids to make sure nothing happened to the film. The film didn't stop or whatever. And I always thought that had to be the greatest thing in the world. That and a crossing guard. I could not wait till I got to middle school or high school to become the guy that runs the projector or crossing guard. Didn't get to be either one of them. But that's the way life goes, I guess. So we got that out of the way. What else we got? We got video games. Now, I'm not going to say anything talk about Atari. I'm probably going to say that for the 80s. Although the late 70s is Atari. But I can remember Pong. Do you remember Pong? I can remember getting Pong. I guess I remember us having Pong. And it was so crazy because I remember going to the mall and playing these arcade games. But Pong was an arcade at your house. You couldn't believe it. Okay, it was one little console with knobs on it. And you had to sit right in front of the TV and boop, 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 boop. Boop, 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 boop. I probably don't sound nothing like that. But remember Pong? Play it by myself, play it with my friends. Well, not my friends. I didn't have any friends in the 70s probably. I was too little. But my sister would play Pong with me. My brother would play Pong with me. I would probably bug them all day to play Pong. My sister was probably like, hey, shut up. I don't want to play Pong. I want to listen to Leif Garrett. And I was like, no, play Pong. Listen to Leif Garrett later. And then I'd go ask my brother. I was like, hey, brother, you want to play Pong with me? He's like, no, there's a Bruce Lee movie coming on. I don't know who that is. I would tell him. I know who it is later. So, Pong. Oh, I love playing Pong. It's so boring today. You try to play and you're like, this is horrible, boring crap. How could you ever play it? It was one game. Man, it was cool at the time. It was. So where are we at now? I'm not a big fashion guy, as you can see. I mean, but man, was there some good 70s clothes. I remember being a kid, you could get a sports coat. As a kid, I'm talking like 6 years old, you would have a sports coat that matched your pants. How freaking cool is that? They don't even do that today. And it was always just like, it always looked like somebody just shot a couch. You know, it looks like it was somebody found a couch on the side of the road, took the fabric off and made a pants and jacket suit out of it. It was awesome. But the best thing about the 70s when it comes to clothes was iron-on t-shirts. Here it was. Finally. You could express yourself with t-shirts without having to wait till the store carried that logo, whatever you wanted, because there was usually some little shop out in some little shopping center, maybe some little kiosk set up somewhere where the guy would sell iron-ons. Or you could order them out of magazines, and you could get iron-ons, everything. I remember this one iron. I remember a guy lived next to me. He's a little older than us, probably in his 20s, and he had this shirt that had a van on it and said, if you ain't living the van life, you ain't shit. And I never thought I'd see a cuss word on a t-shirt. I mean, I barely heard any cuss words back then. So this was crazy seeing, to me, a grown man, although he's probably in his early 20s, with a shirt that had the word shitting on it. I couldn't believe it. Of course, my parents were like, stay away from that guy. He's probably smokes a lot of dope. And looking back now, he probably did, because I know he would always have a van. It would be blaring out some Grateful Dead. So he's probably taking some of the funny mushrooms too. But iron-on shirts, Star Wars. Of course I had a Star Wars iron-on shirts. Man, and I even have it somewhere, all those 80s. Empire Strikes Back, iron-on, little baby shirt. It's like this big. I need to find that. I have it somewhere. Oh, anyway. Iron-ons. I mean, there was all kinds of Farrah Fawcett. Any celebrity. Wacky sayings. Oh, keep on trucking. I remember that was a big one for some reason. I don't even know what that means, keep on trucking. I guess it's for 18-wheelers. Now, I could probably get done an episode about, I probably could have talked about CB radios. I didn't put that on my list, but let's talk about CB radios. How cool was that? I can remember we had a station wagon. My brother and sister would be in the back, and sometimes I get to sit in the front between mom and dad. We'd go on road trips. And that CB radio, I can still see that glare, the light glare in it and everything. I pick up that CB and, hey, Breaker 19, this is Teddy Bear. Anybody out there? I don't ever remember talking to anybody or anybody ever being out there. I remember there was one station, like dial number 4 or something. My dad would always freak out if I put it over there. That's the police band! The police band! Don't put it... Parents always freaked out about stuff. I don't know what it is, too. For some reason, if you're in the back of that station wagon, or I guess any car, and you touch a light, if you turn on the side panel light, my dad would act like he just went blind and run off the road just because a little light on the back of the car was on, in the back seat. But CB radios was pretty cool. I mean, I guess it's like the Twitter of the 70s, although you just had a little mile radius. But every once in a while, I could hear some truckers on there, talking, hey, Lee, this is the rubber ducky. What's your 1040? We got a bear in the air. And I'd be, oh, man, this is so cool. So cool. I couldn't wait till I grown up, got a car, got my own CB. Again, never happened. Had my own car, didn't have my own CB. What else is on my list here? I have to talk about this just because of this channel, the birth of the action figures. Now, of course, my big into action figures were the early 80s, but come on. You had Mego was the king of the 70s. You had Star Trek, of course. You had Planet of the Apes. I remember my brother had Planet of the Apes, and I used to play with it, and I didn't even know what the Planet of the Apes was at the time. Oh, then you had the Micronauts. Remember those? Micronauts. Whew, the size of Star Wars figures, right before Star Wars figures. And they were so shiny and cool looking. And then you had the Shogun Warriors. Oh my God, the Shogun. My brother had this big Shogun Warrior. I loved it. Shot missiles off his hand. Of course, I got a little Shogun Warrior that was made out of metal, and he was probably about the size of a Star Wars figure. But my brother got the big one. And talking about Mego, he had the Star Trek playset. You remember that? It was like a vinyl case. You opened it up and it had the bridge, and I think it had 2 little rooms off to the side, or maybe it was all the bridge. I know it had the place where you could put the teleporter. You put the Mego figure in it and spin this thing at the top and hit blue or red, and it would stop and make them disappear. But really be a back door on the back side of the vinyl case. You could take him out. Love that thing. I need to buy one of those. That was so cool. And I remember some other figures he had was Johnny West, I think they might have been called. I'm not sure, but they were cowboys, and they came with these horses. That might have been 60s, and he might have just had them still. But I remember they were probably about the size of Migos, but they wasn't doll-like. They were kind of more harder plastic. I have to look that up and put a picture somewhere if I see one. I think they were called Johnny West, but I could be wrong. And then you had your fun travel games. Kids today, they got their iPads and all that, but we couldn't watch movies on our phone when we went out of town. What did we play with? A water game. Remember this water game? You squeeze those buttons and you try to get the loop to go around. Oh, it was horrifying. And you finally get one loop in. You hit a button, it would blow air up and blow these little rings. And you finally get on the hook. You got one more and it's floating. You're like, it's going to land on the hook. And then your dad hits a bump. Boom! And the water flashes everywhere and all your little floaty things go everywhere. That and stopping at Stuckey's to buy an invisible ink pad or book, whatever it was called then. You could play hangman, tic-tac-toe, all kinds of stuff, mazes, and it would be invisible. You use an invisible pen to draw around to where like hangman. And you'll color his little dot scheme. I don't know if I'm explaining this right, but I didn't plan to talk about that invisible ink pad, but okay, let's talk music. And for me in the 70s, there was only one kind of music. Well, I'm not counting the Urban Chipmunk album that I used to listen to all the time. But when it came to cool music, there was only one music. And that was by the band Kiss. I didn't listen to anybody else in this. Now, my brother, again, was probably about 5 years older around that. And he was really into Kiss. So, of course, I had to be into Kiss because he was into Kiss. But they were just so cool. He liked Gene, and I was more partial to Paul. I loved not Paul, did I say Paul? Peter. I love Peter. That didn't sound right. I hope nobody clips that out. I don't mean I love Peter. I mean I love Peter Chris. I remember having a school festival and they paint your face and they painted mine as Peter Chris, and I didn't wash my face for like 5 days. But that's not really that unusual because probably I didn't wash my face all week anyway unless I was forced to take a bath. That's something I didn't like in the 70s, taking a bath. Still not a big fan of it today, but sometimes you got to do what you got to do, right? But Kiss, I can't really explain for younger people. that didn't grow up in the 70s how big and awesome Kiss was to not just kids my age, but even like teenagers. You've never seen anything like that. I mean, kids that grew up in the 60s didn't have anything like Kiss. I guess they had, maybe some Rolling Stones and Beatles, but Demons, Breathing Fire. Oh, just crazy, man. You couldn't believe it. Phantom, you got to watch a Kiss movie, Kiss Meets Phantom of the Park, and although it's horrible today, at the time you're like, this is probably the greatest thing since Citizen Kane. But you didn't say that because you didn't know what Citizen Kane was. So you didn't have anything really to compare it with. Man, the 70s, man, the 70s. Let's talk kid shows. Now, that's enough. Now, 80s, I grew up on cartoons, of course, but 70s, kid shows. We're talking first, Land of the Lost. Was there anything more exciting on a Saturday than Land of the Lost in the 70s? Oh, I can't believe I sat here with my mic on mute this whole time. Sorry about that. Hopefully, the sound's not going to be too bad. I had my mic on mute. Now, Land of the Lost. Can you believe Land of the Lost? Oh, and I was probably only about 5 or 6, but I was in love with that little blonde-headed Swiss Miss-looking girl with her pigtails. I never had a final episode. Killed me. Those kids never got home, or the dad. Land of the Lost. And then I think that was Sid and Marty McGraw production, and they had a bunch of other stuff. They had that one we were talking about during our Paul Lynn live stream. What was it with the flute and the witch and everything? H&R Puffin stuff. Whoever wrote that show was puffing. Yeah, I ruined the joke now. Whoever made that show was puffing. Whoever wrote that show was puffing some stuff. I'm sure that joke's been told 1,000 times before, so I just made it worse. Yeah, and then there was one where they shrunk down. Remember that? I don't remember. Land of the Giants was one, but this was a different one where I think Billy Barty was on it, and everybody was small. Not Billy Barty small. I'm talking small. Oh, and Land of the Lost. You remember those bad guys in Land of the Lost? Those aliens? Oh, what was their name? Oh my God. The Sleestaks. Was anything more creepier than the Sleestaks in the 80s? Oh, maybe Rogan from Space Giants. Maybe. And then you had the really kid shows. I know everybody loves Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers this, Mr. Rogers that. Yeah, I love Mr. Rogers. Great show. Loved it. King Friday. I didn't even realize until I was older that King Friday on Mr. Rogers was the 13th King. Friday the 13th is his name. King Friday the 13th. What kind of twisted, sick shit is that? But I love Mr. Rogers. But to me, I really loved Captain Kangaroo. Who didn't like Captain Kangaroo? He would stand there and a little moose would come out. A little puppet moose would come out. And you have to admit, maybe that's why I talk to, Larry Wampa in my videos now. I kind of got he's my moose and I'm Captain Kangaroo. Loved Captain Kangaroo. And you had an electric company. I've talked about that before. You had the Spider-Man. But the best thing part of the electric company was Letterman. Remember that? He was like a superhero and he had a letter on his chest. And Joan Rivers was like the narrator. And Gene Wilder did the voice. And he had this little mean guy like Danny DeVito. But he would always take a word like they'll be at a baseball game, right? And he has a bat. And he would take the B off bat and put a C. And then they'd be playing baseball with a cat. Until Letterman showed up and ripped the B off his chest and fixed it. It was awesome. I love that. And I love that show. Loved Electric Company. Have I talked about everything else? TV shows. Now, I didn't get into much TV shows in the 70s. And if I did, it was sitcoms. And these sitcoms really hold up today. I watched a lot of sitcoms in the 80s. Different Strokes, Cosby Show, Silver Spoons. I hated Ricky Schroeder, Punky Brewster. These shows don't hold up. I try to go back and watch some of these 80s sitcoms, and they're horrible. They don't really hold up. But 70s, although at the time I probably didn't really get most of the jokes, but going back, I was going to say Family Affair. Remember that? Family Affair? Oh, Brian Keith. All in the Family. Great show. Still very funny today. They wouldn't even do a show like that today. And I'm still Sanford and Son. Oh, I loved it back then. But today watching, I see it completely different. I just love this. Oh, I can still watch Sanford and Son. I don't even care if it's the season where Sanford ain't on it and they got Grady living with them. Still good. Didn't like the 80s spinoff Sanford when he lived with the fat white man, but oh, Sanford, Good Times, great show, great show. Still go back and watch Good Times. Let's see on my notes here. Did I write any more down? No, I only wrote those down. But Barney Miller, again, I probably didn't remember much about Barney Miller as a kid, what was going on, but I went back and watched it and loved it. WKRP, that's 70s, right? That's a really good one. Remember Fish, the spinoff to Barney Miller? You never see that. Never see that. I used to like that. Even the Goat, I loved it. Well, like my grandpa. Welcome Back, Kotter. Remember? That was really good too. And these shows, like I said, they hold up. I can go back and watch a lot of these shows again. Taxi. Now, Taxi, I remember my parents used to watch it, and I would watch it just because it was on, because we only had one TV. Maybe two by the late 70s, but one TV that we all sat around and watched. Taxi. Oh, Reverend Jim, Andy Kaufman, loved it. And going back watching Taxi now, love it even more. It is awesome. Let's do one more and then we'll cut this. I mean, we're almost 20 minutes here. One more. And this is a person. There's no way you didn't grow up in the 70s and love Evel Knievel. Is there anybody more badass in the history of the world than Evel Knievel? I mean, even that name, Evel Knievel. Now I know you younger kids are saying, well, we got this guy that, he'll put on a harness and walk a tightrope across the Grand Canyon or between buildings on live TV. Well, pussy. Evel Knievel would jump ramps on TV, jump into the Grand Canyon, or jump over the Grand Canyon or something. Jump the water, the Little Caesars, not the pizza place. The hotel in Las Vegas. It has these big fountains out front. He jumped it on TV. No harness. And you know what was so great about that? He wrecked. Almost every time I can think of, he wrecked. He would break every bone in his body. And then months later, he'd be back on TV trying to jump something else. And he'd wreck again. And let's be honest. I know you watch the guy with the tightrope and everything. We hate to admit it to ourselves, but part of us, I mean, we want to see him walk across that thin rope or see a Evel Knievel or stunt guy do something right. But there's also part of our brain that, I hope he falls. I hope he wrecks. I hope he gets hurt. Sick. I know you won't admit it, but that's a part of us because we want to say, hey, we saw that happen. Years later, we say, hey, I remember seeing that on TV. But Evel Knievel, if he made it without wrecking, that was more shocking than anything. He would always wreck. He would usually make the jump, but then bust his ass on the landing. For some reason he could always jump over everything, but that landing would always get him. Oh, I think that's it. I did about 10 of them, right? The 70s. Y'all let me know if y'all like this, and I'll ramble about the 80s probably next week. Hope I'm not rambling too much. This isn't really a planned out list or anything. Just me rambling. This is a rambling video. So let me know in the comments below what you think of the 70s. Did you love the 70s like I love the 70s? Whew. If I talk 20-something minutes about the 70s, the 80s video is going to be over an hour. But hopefully the mic problem was okay. I fixed it now. I wasn't about to start all over. I was on a roll. But let me know in the comments below what you thought of the 70s. Some things you loved about the 70s that I forgot here, or maybe some things that you forgot about and I mentioned here, and you're like, yeah, I love that also. And as always, subscribe to the channel. Thumb up so you like my content. And you know what? We'll talk again soon.
Junkman.
Thank you, sir, for that unsolicited testimony.